Thousands of planes crash every year. Thousands of planes crash every year. If you want to make an argument that what's happening right now is a direct result of Trump, there is some factual evidence that you could kind of use to make that argument. But simply pointing out that a few planes crashed when it's normal for thousands of them to crash, not a solid argument. This is a prime example of how, again, it's nonsense. This attack on mainstream media coming from independent media as if they're somehow better. What we have in this country is mainstream media professionals and journalists that have the training to know how to do good journalism. However, they, incentivized by profits, will violate the core principles of good journalism, which is why sometimes you see the garbage that you do coming from mainstream media. And there's lots of garbage in mainstream media, but not as much as what you see in independent media, which is far worse. On the other hand, you have independent media who don't have the training, in most cases, don't have the understanding of how to actually do the job. So that's why you can get an even worse result, with the exception being certain topics that they choose to focus on, like, for example, Gaza. There's much better coverage of the situation in Gaza from independent media than you will from corporate media. But that's an exception. The reason why you'll see a lot of independent media people telling you, look at all these planes are crashing right now, is because they are amateur journalists, right? They play games about, well, we're not really journalists, they're journalists. There's different types of journalism, right? You have entertainment journalists, there's different types. It's not all just the news anchor telling you the news. There's different forms of journalism, and they're doing a form of journalism, and they don't have the training. And I want you to understand something. I'm a person, I didn't go to fancy universities, right? I'm self-taught, right? I do not have a college degree, right? But I'm highly trained, right? So the training's not about going to fancy schools. The training is about the training, right? Whether you buy the books yourself and teach yourself, or you go to the schools. The bottom line is to have the training. The people in mainstream media, they have the training. They will betray the training in pursuit of profits. So what these folks in independent media are doing is a worse version of what you see in mainstream media. Gets their news from news wires. They have these official news feeds that gives them the stories, things that are happening around the world, press releases, things like that. But then the YouTubers, they're using random people on Twitter, right? They have random people on Twitter that they follow who they respect and trust, right? So if one of those random people says, there's been no plane crashes in 15 years, right? Because that random person doesn't have journalism training, doesn't know how to vet sources, doesn't know how to verify information. They saw some source that they trust, right? Because these are not journalists either, right? So these are people who are, and many times, getting their news from mainstream media, right? So someone in mainstream media, a trusted source in a suit, says, there hasn't been any plane crashes in 15 years, right? And then this person, rather than check to see if that's true or not, they just go and, this is a good point to put out, and they put it out on Twitter, right? And then these independent, YouTubers, they see the people they follow doing this, and this right wing media does it, left wing media does it, right? No crash 15. That's a great point to make to really hit at Trump, right? This is Trump, why these planes are crashing, and here's proof. There's been no plane crashes in 15 years. That is false, right? Lazy, sloppy journalism. No one is sitting back and actually verifying what they're being told, right? They're sitting there in their basements, on YouTube, just saying stuff they see on Twitter, right? The people on Twitter, repeating stuff they see in mainstream media, who sometimes cuts corners, right? So if mainstream media makes a mistake, they're not going to pick up on it because they just like, oh, he says this and it sounds good. I'm going to go put it out there, right? I'm going to put a link in the description. If you want to know how many crashes happen in this country on a regular basis, this is the information age. We all have internet. We have Google. And now we have AI. If you're lazy and you don't want to go around, ask the AI, right? You have so many choices, ChatGPT, whatever. There's no excuse to be putting out information that's incorrect, right? We all have this information. And if you're doing this as a job, you're making money. I don't make any money doing this. Why is it that I can be more thorough in what I'm putting out there and I don't make any money? These people, that's their job. And they just, somebody said this on Twitter, let me go repeat it. There's been no crash in 15 years. No, take a link in the description. There's thousands of plane crashes every single year, right? That doesn't change the fact that flying is one of the safest ways to travel. It is very safe. When you look at it relative to the amount of flights, the amount of crashes is very small. The amount of fatalities, even smaller than that. So it's very safe. But what happens is after a crash, mainstream media exploits this because everyone's going to be more paranoid about crashes. So let's say last year there was 2 or 3, crashes that involved fatalities, and they only reported on one of them because it was like 300 people. The other ones was like 3 people and 2 people. They didn't report on those. This year, you're going to get all of those stories, right? Because it's going to be a hot topic. Not only because a big plane crash happened, so people are going to be like, oh goodness, right? But also because of Trump and what he's doing. And the reality is, even though we don't have any evidence that anything Trump is doing is causing crashes, the stuff that he's doing can absolutely lead to crashes and problems with aviation safety. Absolutely. But the fact that he's being reckless and he's putting our lives in danger, the fact that there are crashes happening are 2 different topics, 2 different things, right? To connect them, you need to find some kind of dot that you can draw a line between. Trump did this action, there was a plane crash, cause of the plane crash was the action that Trump took specifically because of X, Y, and Z. If you can't do that, then the idea of promoting that, oh, Planes are falling out of the sky because of Trump. Fictitious. Erroneous. Absolutely false. Trump does make it unsafe to fly compared to the previous administration because of the reckless actions that he's taking, because of the lack of leadership, because of the lack of seriousness. I believe that to be absolutely true. But again, separate topic from that planes are crashing. Planes always crash. Planes always will crash. There's no vehicle that does not crash, right? Any vehicle that's out there, whether it's a car, it's a boat, it's a plane, it will crash, right? Especially, and the amount of these vehicles, the amount of the travels that these vehicles take, that's gonna increase the amount of crashes big time, right? The more of a certain type of vehicle they are, the more opportunities for it to crash. It is just a fact of reality. But let's make sure that the information that we're putting out to people is accurate. We are in a critical time in this country. Now is not the time for sloppy journalism.